I remember last time I jumped the gun too early.
Oh, no, sorry. That's the wrong. Oh, shucks. I'll be back.
Trisha, if it's not 12:02 yet and you know that I can go, just let me know.
Okay.
Attendees are on. So hi, everybody. We're going to start in a few minutes.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. All right, welcome everyone. This is the YP Votes for Hawaii talk story with U.S. Representative Ed Case. My name is Kyle Shelley and I'm the chair of the YP and your moderator for today. This event is also co-moderated by my esteemed colleague, Kim Morris. She's the chair-elect of the YP. And as a reminder, the YPs were committed to civic engagement. We're coming off a Honolulu mayor debate forum that we did in October. That was a great event and we're very happy to have Congressman Ed Case here to talk story with us. All right, some housekeeping items. We are going to do live audience polling. This will occur throughout the session. The results will be shared and comments to polls will be done through the Q&A session. We are going to do live questions as well. So on your screen at the bottom, there's a Q&A button. So that's turned on. So if you have a question, please click that button and submit it. This event is also recorded, so you can rewatch it and share it after the fact. And then we're also going to have a chat feature that is open, and that's not for live questions, but that's for you as participants to socialize with each other, as the event and discussion transpires. So we have about till 1 o'clock. So let's get this show on the road. Trisha, if you're ready, can you please launch poll number 1? All right, here we go. So poll number 1, which statement regarding our U.S. Congress best describes you? Choice number 1, I understand the structure, purpose, and process of our U.S. Congress. Number 2, I am somewhat familiar with our U.S. Congress. Number 3, I know a little, but I confuse the House and Senate sometimes. And the last one, I've been under a rock. Who is Ed Case? What can he do for me? And while you guys are answering that question, I'm actually going to hand the stage over to Dave Morris, who is the chair of our Military Outreach Committee, to say a few words. David.
Thanks a lot, Kyle. Kyle gave me the opportunity to speak here. I'm excited to announce a new program that we've started with the Chamber of Commerce Young Professionals. It's our Military and Government Outreach Committee. Over the next year, we're going to try and start getting some events out there. And what the purpose of this is to try and engage our post 9/11 veterans here in Hawaii with our business community, because that represents the young professionals demographic, is folks that have served generally after 9/11. And Hawaii has a great history of veterans who are successful in the business community. So there's a lot of stories there. So please keep an eye out. We're going to be offering programs geared toward veteran interests, providing some guidance on transition and how business is done in Hawaii for transitioning veterans. And we're also going to be, in late this spring, we're going to be rolling out an executive mentorship program targeted specifically at the veteran community. So we're looking for veterans who are transitioning or new to the Hawaii business community, and we're going to be pairing them up with executives. Ideally, we're going to try and get veteran executives that can help these folks understand kind of the pathway to success in Hawaii's business community. As a Navy veteran myself, this is a kind of a program that's near and dear to my heart. So please look forward to future programs on that, and reach out to Trisha if you are interested in participating.
Great, thanks, David. And thank you so much, Congressman Ed Case. So it is my pleasure to turn it over to Congressman Ed Case, who represents the Hawaii 1st Congressional District. So go. Oh. But before I do, we need to close the poll. And so here's the results. So which statement regarding our US Congress best describes you? And so looks like the #1 poll result is I am somewhat familiar with our US Congress. So take it away, Congressman Ed Case.
Well, first of all, I'm completely relieved that there was only 8% that didn't have any idea who I was. I was hoping to hold it under 50%. So I'm grateful to each and all of you for the relatively positive notation there. Let me first of all say case.house.gov. Case.house.gov is my congressional office, access to my office. It answers a lot of your questions about who the heck am I and what do I do for you. It is also your entree into really my legislative world and to information on me and how to get in touch with me. And I welcome you, each and all of you, to contact me with anything, whether it be questions on the legislative process or suggestions about what we should be doing or what the heck is this all about, or individual concerns. That is an open forum for me. I am your U.S. Congressman, and I'm here to serve you. So let me start by, for the 8% of you who have no idea who I am, and perhaps a little bit for the rest of you, let me tell you a little bit about myself, just so you can put me in context. So I'm a product of Hawaii Island. I was born and raised in Hilo. My family has been here in Hawaii since 1896, so I'm 4th generation, and we just introduced the 6th generation 2 years ago. So we're working on a long history here. After I went through high school on the Big Island, graduated, went through the public schools in Hilo, and then graduated from Hawaii Prep up in Kamuala. Went to college on the mainland, Williams College in Massachusetts, and then in a fate, in one of those twists, cruel twists of fate, I went down to Washington, D.C. to work on Capitol Hill for one summer. Well, I killed time trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. And here I am, all of those decades later, still on Capitol Hill in my 3rd tour of duty on Capitol Hill. I went to law school in California, came home, and went to work for the Carl Smith Ball law firm, where I worked for 20 years, associate partner, managing partner. So my areas of specialty were real estate and business related. I also, of course, managed the firm. So I managed a business. I was responsible for a business of a substantial budget, as well as hundreds of employees. I, by some accounts, jettisoned all of that to go back into my love of politics. And so I served in the Hawaii State Legislature for 8 years, rising to the position of Majority Leader. I ran for governor, lost governor by 1%. And then in another twist of fate, Patsy Mink, who was the then U.S. Congresswoman from Hawaii, died 6 days after I lost the governorship, and I went right into a special election to replace her. Went back to Congress as a member of Congress representing the 2nd Congressional District for 4+ years, and then ran for the U.S. Senate, lost that race, came home, went back to work with the Bays Deaver law firm as a real estate business attorney, rose up to managing that firm, and then went to work for the Outrigger hotels folks for 5 years as their in the executive suite, senior vice president in charge of all legal affairs. And so had that business experience. And then when the opportunity arose to go back to Congress 2 years ago, I took it. So I'm back in Congress. So that's a long way of saying that I've had a very, very full career, including many years of being a young professional, and then a not so young professional. So I've kind of been through a lot of the both personal and professional evolution that you are all going through right now, having made my home in Hawaii and trying to make Hawaii a better place. And my own career has been about half in the business legal world and half in the political world, and it's been a fantastic career. But here I am still doing it. So let's answer the second part of the question, which is I have no idea what the heck Congress does. Of course, let me describe that to you in terms of what I view as kind of 3 buckets of my job as your congressman. The first bucket that I have is to lead nationally. to contribute to national leadership. Congress is a separate, independent, co-equal branch of government. I have 430 some odd colleagues in the US House and 100 in the US Senate, and our job is to collectively chart the course for our country. And so I spend obviously a great deal of my time trying to make the right decisions for our country, whether they be domestic policies such as healthcare, protection of the environment, or facilitating solid productive business activity, what levels of national debt, any number of issues that are not specific to Hawaii. Foreign policy, which I spend a lot of time on. These are my responsibilities, and I am responsible for all of them, and I tend to focus my energy a little bit more on a few of them, just because you can't be kind of a master of all in an atmosphere of 535 members. And if you pick and choose the areas where you choose to contribute to national leadership, you can make a huge difference in a positive way, or I suppose a negative way, depending on your perspective. The second bucket of my responsibilities are to help Hawaii, to make sure that our federal government is working for us here in Hawaii. I serve on the House Appropriations Committee, which is responsible for virtually all federal funding. As a result, much of my efforts have to do with federal funding for Hawaii, and trying to make sure it goes to the right places and the right amounts. That is obviously a policy job too, because as you allocate funding amounts and directions, you are also setting policy. And so I try to make sure that the policies of our federal government are working for our Hawaii. So whether it be tourism or our military or construction or banking and finance or any number of other areas that we and you are doing, I'm responsible somehow for our federal government's contributions. That's been particularly acute in the middle of COVID-19, which I'll get back to. But the third bucket is to assist my constituents with individual issues. Because aside from national leadership, aside from helping Hawaii generically, the folks that I represent need help with many parts of their daily lives, your daily lives, that impact you on a more individual basis. Some of those are fairly standard and general, such as veterans benefits, Social Security benefits, immigration. But some of them can come in very unexpected ways. Grant applications, businesses that need access to, some information in a foreign country. You kind of think it up, and if it has some nexus to my office, we try to help. And the fact of the matter is, we try to help whether there's no connection whatsoever, because all a lot of people need is a little bit of guidance with their government. And if it's not my kuleana, at least I know whose it is and how to get those answers. So those are my three buckets. And I work between those buckets every single day. I work from national leadership to helping Hawaii to individual assistance every day. In a non-COVID year, my efforts would be really divided among those buckets. A lot of it would be the Appropriations Committee, but other committees that I serve on and other organizations that I serve with include the Natural Resources Committee, which is responsible for our country's natural resources, which in my case includes our oceans. A specific passion of mine is to try to save our world's oceans. So I spend a fair bit of time trying to lead national efforts in that direction, since most of the Congress doesn't know anything about our world's oceans. And so I try to contribute in that sphere. I'm on a number of what we call caucuses, which are collective efforts of members of Congress that are directed at a specific purpose. So we gather together for that purpose. For example, connections with other countries. I'm on the US-Australia caucus, the US-Japan caucus. You get the idea. We also have a more ideological caucuses that are aimed at trying to forward a particular perspective. One of them is referred to as the Blue Dog Caucus. There's a long history for that, but our concerns are national fiscal stability and national defense. And so I unify with my colleagues. That one happens to be a Democratic caucus, but take a caucus like the Pacific Islands Caucus, which I formed this year for the very first time with Republican and Democrat colleagues. And that focuses on the particular challenges of our Pacific Islands, the entirety of the Pacific Ocean and all of the jurisdictions within it, to include Hawaii, needs special attention on a variety of fronts, whether it be security, whether it be economic, whether it be environmental, whether it be social, cultural. And we have banded together to try to articulate and forward a policy that will help us all in that direction. When it comes to helping Hawaii, I definitely focus on our principal industries and well, really all of our industries, our specific industries. So that takes me on a daily basis between tourism and our defense military, certainly construction, agriculture, technology, finance, right across the board. And I simply try to figure out every day, well, how can I help in that department? I was on the phone, for example, this morning with folks talking about national travel and tourism policy, what we could do in the COVID environment. Let me talk about COVID for a second, because I don't think there's any particular crisis that we've had that so illustrates the range of responsibilities that my office carries with acute need. Of course, we all know that COVID has been a incredibly destructive crisis for our country and for our Hawaii. Although we have, had a better public health result, we've had one of the worst economic results in the entire country for obvious reasons. So from that perspective, starting from really February, even January, when we had the first briefings where we really didn't understand it yet, but then more acutely in February and going into March, from a national leadership perspective, what did our country need in terms of COVID emergency assistance? That resulted in the CARES Act funding, which was multi-trillion dollars throughout our country, including at the end of the day, some $10+ billion to Hawaii, to small businesses, to government, to our healthcare providers, to our social services organizations across the board. A lifesaver, but really exhausted at this point. From a Hawaii perspective, the challenge there was to make sure that that money did get to where it needed to get in Hawaii. And that was a month-long effort on a daily, hourly basis to make sure, number one, that people knew how to just simply apply for that money. And number two, to get the money out of Congress and into the administration, and from the administration here through government to the end result. And then number three, incredible need from an individual assistance perspective to my constituents. And by the way, when I say my constituents, we have two congressional districts in Hawaii. The first congressional, mine, which is basically urban Honolulu, and the second congressional, which I used to represent, which is the rest of Hawaii. We've never, in the course of Hawaii's statehood, distinguished much between the two districts. So I do, just as much work across the state as I do across the rest of the state as I do in the first, and vice versa for my colleague over on the second side, which has been Tulsi Gabbard, about to switch to Kaekahele. So that is in a nutshell. I guess I would say at the end of the day that I would love to partner with each and all of you. You all are a member of YP because you care about collective effort and care about the future of Hawaii. And I think we have major decisions to make for Hawaii and the generations to come. And I'll tick off just a few of them for you. That I think you're going to be far more a part of forging than I will. I fought this fight and it needs to be carried into next generations. Number one, I think we need to think hard about the nature of our tourism industry, I would say. I don't think that a purely volume-based tourism industry where we chase higher and higher arrivals every year is going to be the answer to tourism or to our Hawaii as a host for tourism going out into the next generations. Imagine that you go from 10 million arrivals a year to 15 million in the next 5 or 10 years. What does that Hawaii look like? Are we going to maintain the same level of support for tourism in Hawaii, which is so key to tourism? Those are questions that have not been asked generationally in a long time, and they need to be asked now, because the trajectory once we return from COVID-19 is I think a dangerous trajectory to tourism, and we can in fact have good solid jobs. We can in fact maintain tourism as our #1 economy without destroying it in the process and without destroying our economy. Number two, I would say to you, and you made mention of our military, that we have a critical mission here in Hawaii in terms of our country with our military and defense spend as we see the rise of China in the Indo-Pacific. This is not just a matter of competition with China, it's also a matter of maintaining an economic base for us from countries such as Japan that are so tied to us economically. This is going to be the challenge of literally 2 generations to come. And in Hawaii, of course, that is something that I think we should do as a matter of support for our country, but it is also a key industry for us that supports virtually all of us directly or indirectly. And so to the extent that you can continue to support a military presence, which takes us all to very hard decisions, perhaps in hard discussions, such as whether to continue the military's training ranges at Pohakuloa and on this island at Kahuku and over on Kauai. There are a growing number of people in Hawaii that don't want those to continue, which I think would be a disaster. We have to have that discussion. We have to make those decisions. I could go on for a while, but I'm going to stop because you have a few more polls that I'm scared of, and also you have questions for me. So I want to see where you want to take this. But thank you again for the.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman, for that. You kept talking to us so smooth, and I wish I could do the same in my practice. I guess an opening question for you is, given our demographic, the young professionals aged 21 to 39, millennials, if thinking about that group, if there's anything specifically that you're doing in Congress, whether it's in the short term with this coronavirus relief bill, or then even beyond that, that would really benefit our demographic in Hawaii. If there's anything specific that you could outline, that would be great.
Well, I think I would answer that by not so much focusing on your demographic, because your demographic does not have particularly dramatically unique circumstances in terms of how to deal with COVID-19. I mean, we're all impacted by it. We all are dependent to some extent, or to a great extent, or a lesser extent, on a vibrant economy to carry us forward. I guess I could make the argument, having been there myself as, again, a young professional with a young family and supporting a place to live, and concerned that, and having worked my way, by the way, through 2 or 3 recessions or comparable crises. This isn't the first one I've been in. There's a particular need to maintain strong networks of economic relief when you are a little bit more vulnerable to economies in the early part of your career. I guess I could make that case, but the bottom line is that if I help to stabilize Hawaii's economy overall and work on tourism in particular, and our military, and trying to maintain federal projects, and to maintain good, strong economic emergency assistance, and try to help the people that are falling through the gaps, of which we have hundreds of thousands here in Hawaii, that does help your demographic along with everybody else. So I don't have in all honesty, a magic, oh yeah, this is exactly what I'm doing for 21 to 39 that is materially different from anybody else.
Understood. All right, so let's kick off another poll. Tricia, if you could launch poll number 2. And so for the audience, heads up, we're going to try and pull out areas of concern that you may have. So here it is. Of the following, which topics are the most important to you? And we want you to select 3, your top 3. So the first one is Hawaii's brain drain, leaving Hawaii for better opportunities. Second one is improving cost of living realities, taxes, Jones Act as an example, cost of education, COVID-19 impact, both health and economic, government stimulus funding for 2021, political bipartisanship, social security availability, healthcare, economic diversification that's specific to Hawaii, and police reform. And if there's not a topic on there that you are passionate about, then please submit a question via our Q&A button, and we can pick it up that way. So I'll give the audience some time to complete this. And Kim, do you have any announcements or anything?
Well, I had a lot of fun facts about Congressman Ed Case, but you touched on all of them. So thank you so much for your great synopsis of what you're doing for us here in Hawaii. So I'll give it another
You mean
couple
you didn't
seconds.
find any of those things that are way hidden, way deep in my website that everybody cites as fun facts that I didn't talk about, like being a jackaroo in Australia for a year or that kind of stuff?
Not much, not much. Just in your spare time, you enjoy hiking and outdoor water activities.
I do.
Okay, Trisha,
I
let's
try to get
close
on
the
those.
poll. All right, so it looks like our top, well, we actually have a split for the top 4, actually. So Kyle, if you want to make note of that. Our number 1 is Hawaii's brain drain. Our second highest is improving the cost of living. And then the third and fourth, which are split 50%, is COVID-19 impact and economic diversification. So we do have a question on that. And so I'll pass it back to Kyle.
All right, thank you. So brain drain was, I think, one of the top ones. So we're just going to go right into another poll. So Trisha, if you could launch poll number 3. All right. Poll number 3, here it is. If Hawaii's career opportunities and cost of living realities continue to worsen, would you consider moving you and or your household out of the state? So yes, I will consider leaving Hawaii. No, I'm staying here. Or the last one, I have seriously considered moving away already. So if the audience could go ahead and respond to that poll.
We'll take a few
Congressman.
seconds. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, I mean, you love the oceans. Are you a scuba diver and free diver? Do you do a lot of the waterman activities?
Well, over the course of my life, I've done a couple of things in quite a bit. I did a lot of spearfishing and free dive spearfishing. I do scuba dive, but I don't spearfish off of it. So I love to do, that water activity. I also, like a lot of other people, started out surfing, but I was a competitive swimmer in high school and was very comfortable body surfing. And I frankly just thought it was a lot simpler to body surf than surf. So I started into body surfing and still think in the figments of my imagination that I can rip it at Sandy pretty well. I tried to do it a couple of years back and go out and act like the old days, and all of a sudden everybody's calling me uncle and giving me way on the wave. And then I thought maybe something's wrong here. And I love sailing also. I've done a fair bit of open ocean sailing in my career. And of late, I sail Hobie Cats in Kaneohe Bay. So got a club there, Kokokahi Yacht Club, real mellow club, just storage really and launch and sail. So when I'm back from DC and I have the time, that's how I encounter the ocean nowadays.
Nice.
All right.
Okay, so our poll is closed. Trisha, launch the results. Okay, it looks like 50% has said, no, I'm staying here. 33%, I have seriously considered moving away. And 17% say, yes, I will consider leaving Hawaii. So pretty interesting percentage here. And this is one of our biggest topics on our YP program that we discuss. So interested to hear Kyle's question.
Yeah, so Congressman, the question related to that poll is just, it looks like half are going to stay here no matter what, and the other half, may leave. And that's caused by below average compensation, cost of living hurdles, limited economic opportunities. and that's a problem for our state. So, the question is, what are you doing to address, the issue of brain drain and or create incentives, for us to stay here?
Well, let me start by saying that the answers to the previous question and the last question are all amount to the same basic challenge that we have here, which is high cost of living and limited opportunity. And we all want to live here. We all want to make our lives here, but that's not a practical option for too many. So in this department, and I will say to you that I think that 2 generations now of political leadership and not just political leadership, but community leadership as well, has failed to solve this basic issue, which has so many facets to it. And I have 4 children. 2 of them live here and 2 of them don't. The 2 that don't probably would if they could find the opportunities and in their chosen professions and in the right level of living to compensation. So they've chosen to make a different decision than 2 of them that have chosen to stay here. So my own family is 50-50. Let me say a couple of things here up front. First of all, I sometimes wish that I was the grand poobah of Hawaii and could muster federal, state, and local government anytime I wanted to, and direct the direction of this state. But the fact of the matter is, I'm a U.S. representative, and my kuleana is the federal government. I'm not governor, so I can't make some of the decisions that relate directly to this, and I'm not a mayor, so I can't make those decisions. What I can do is do what I can do, and I can work with the others towards that. So a couple of different comments. First of all, in terms of what I can directly do about it, we're kind of back to the same things that I talked about earlier, which is, can I bring the resources of the federal government to bear on supporting the industries that we have that are good, solid industries, and perhaps more importantly, B, diversifying away from those industries to create new industries. So we've talked already about tourism and our defense spending and construction, which, by the way, collectively account for somewhere in the range of 50% plus of our total economy is right there in those 3. That's dangerous. That's great, but it's dangerous. And we've already seen that in tourism because tourism was so susceptible to COVID-19. Now, what are some of the other industries that we can really get ahead of, I think? Well, I have for decades now believed that we could develop a high-tech industry that was second to none in the world. And we're not talking about high-tech manufacturing, because anytime we get into the manufacture of a product, it's tough for us to compete with the rest of the world in terms of supply chains of bringing materials in and then shipping them back out to market. We're just a long way from the principal markets. And for a real critical mass of an industry that will employ a lot of people and generate a lot of income, you can't have a market of only Hawaii. You've got to go beyond Hawaii. And those of you that are in export activities here know exactly what I'm saying. And so manufacturing per se is not gonna do it unless you are in high quality niche markets where you can command a value premium for your product. Agriculture is a very good example of this. 25, 50 years ago, it was high volume. It's a little bit like tourism if you think about it. 25, 50 years ago, it was high volume sugar and pineapple, high volume, employed a lot of people. But that was no longer feasible economically in a changed world. And so we switched over to high value niche products, which were fewer, more diverse, but commanded a higher price at the deli and LA or the Whole Foods in New York City, whatever it might be. And so we have those opportunities in high tech where we're not reliant anymore on supply chains. All that we need is a computer. All we need is the intellectual capacity, and we have just outstanding talent coming out of Hawaii. I'll give you 2 companies that are pretty good examples of this. Oceanit, which is a company in downtown Honolulu in the technology and innovation sphere, They do world-class research. I think their employment is 150, maybe something like that. And they've been a very successful company. They're contributing to economic diversification. Another one would be Nalo Scientific, which is a company that is a spin-off of physics grad students. They do work basically in high precision measurement and nanotechnology, really. They've got a company in Manoa that is doing world-class research. They employ local, graduates, and so these are just two examples. Now, if we could take that and expand it, we could start to develop some critical mass to economic diversification that we don't have right now, and government needs to be a part of that. Government can't just sit back and say, "Well, oh, fine, it'll just happen on its own." It won't happen on its own. It needs government incentivization to get to a point where it's at critical mass. And so that's the hook into government. We try to support that from a federal perspective by federal research and development dollars going to institutions such as the University of Hawaii, such as the two companies I mentioned, because that's good for the feds. They get what they want, especially on the military side. And it's good for us because we get to develop a critical mass of diversification. Now, in terms of the cost of living, which is the other part of this stool, after economic diversification and better job opportunities, more challenge, more career advancement that can stay here and generate the kind of income. The other side is a high cost of living. And that has so many angles to it, almost all of which, unfortunately, are state and local government driven. So land use, for example, conditions of developing apartments in Kaka'ako. Why did we go in the direction of high-end luxury for every one of those, as opposed to say, well, we want a better mix of housing so that a better mix of local residents could access those. We made a mistake. The Jones Act, which is a shipping law, which basically drives up the cost of anything that we ship in here, is a major contributor to the cost of living. That's a federal issue, and I'm happy to get into that. I know that was one of your questions, but I'll stop there and see if you want to go there or go somewhere else.
Yeah, thank you. And both Kim and I are actually purchasers of reserved affordable housing in Kaka'ako. We wish that inventory was larger. So we were fortunate, it was a lottery system there too. Let's talk about the Jones Act. You got right in it. That's a, highly debatable topic here in Hawaii. Some will argue that it's necessary to maintain reliable shipping to and from the state. Others say it ultimately leads to lower, prices on goods if we repeal it or have an exemption. So, curious what your position or opinion is on the Jones Act.
Well, I think the Jones Act doesn't work for Hawaii. It's a very controversial position. I get the folks that benefit from the Jones Act the most yelling and screaming at me all the time. They don't give me money for my political campaigns. They're happy to support my opponents. They don't like me talking like this. And they don't want to highlight the Jones Act. Nonetheless, I keep on it. Basically, the Jones Act, in so many words, says that if you transit, this is, by the way, 100-year-old federal law, virtually never amended. So it was enacted in a different time. And what it basically says is when you transit U.S. goods between U.S. ports, you must use U.S. flagged, U.S. manned, U.S. everything shipping. Great idea, except that we have very, very few Jones Act ships here today. We're down under 100 for the entire country. So imagine that all domestic shipping in this country is confined to a narrow market of 100 ships. That's called a monopoly. And to make the monopoly worse, there is a huge volume of shipping out there that is not U.S. flagged. And the rates for shipping on those ships are fractions less than the rates of shipping them on Jones Act ships. And so, let's take a standard question. You want to talk about furniture that you bought for your house. That wasn't made here. That came in a container. Now, if the container costs 3 times more on a Jones Act ship, than if it used some of the surplus market in the world for this at a far less price, and that piece of furniture would be a lot less. Now this stuff adds up. There was actually a study just done, independent study just done that calculated the cost of Jones Act shipping very significant, 10 to 15%. Now you take 10 to 15% and add that up to the cost of building a house here, where the land is high enough to start with, but all housing materials are Jones Act shipped housing materials. So imagine you can trim the cost of housing. Now the argument about whether it's reliable or not, well, that's going to go on for a long time. The real question there is, can we develop reliable shipping independent of 100 minus Jones Act ships throughout our country? And I think we can. I think we can certainly, employ shipping from our friends and allies around the world where we don't worry about it being cut off in the time of a crisis. I think that, so bottom line, I could go on the Jones Act for a while. It's particularly impactful on Hawaii because we don't have an alternative to shipping. So I've introduced legislation in Congress that says, hey, Jones Act, you want to stay in effect for the mainland, go right ahead. You have other alternatives. If you want to pay that price, that's your business. But don't pin it on my state, which is held hostage to Jones Act shipping. That we only have two companies that supply all of our goods, Matson and Pasha. Those companies, the Jones Act is great. They have a government-sponsored monopoly. Who wouldn't want a government-sponsored monopoly? But that's not the way it's supposed to operate, especially in completely dependent markets. So I'm pretty much an opponent of it, as you can tell, and I hope that you amplify my thoughts.
Well, hey, I'm happy that you're just speaking your mind on a controversial topic there. And let's move into a different topic, and then we'll have a live question from the audience. And this one is on bipartisanship. The country definitely observed that it's more polarized, maybe than ever. And this is the 117th Congress that's going to convene in January. So the administration is changing, the Biden administration. And, broadly speaking, just what are your priorities in Congress in the upcoming term? Whether it's reaching across the aisle, but, what will you do, to get legislation passed and get things done?
Yeah, well, we're functioning in a more divided country than ever. Consider that, for example, polls post-election in our country asked Republicans, for example, how concerned were they at a Biden presidency, and vice versa. Democrats, how concerned were they if well, I guess this is right before the election, if Trump was reelected. And the answer was, to me, staggering. Republicans were at levels of 70 to 80% deep concern, and similarly with Democrats in the reverse. Now that demonstrates a fundamental fear of the other party's candidate being elected president, not just I prefer that Trump be reelected versus Biden, and I will accept the result. We're talking fear. And so that translates into Congress, because Congress is nothing more or less than a mixing ground at a highly centralized area for the country. And so I interact with colleagues all the time who have completely different perspectives, completely different districts than I do. Sometimes I sit down and I say, why do you think this way? Because I don't get that. And you get some surprising answers, and maybe they get them from me too. And so this is a major problem. I did a survey off of one of my recent e-newsletters, which I, by the way, would love everybody to sign up for, off of case.house.gov. And this was a simple survey, monkey survey on a number of issues. And I asked this question: how serious do you think? What is your view of the partisan divide? A was, it's a serious problem. Both countries, both parties have to work closer together. B was, it's a serious problem because the other party doesn't see it my way. And C was, it's not a problem at all. 80% picked A. Now that was a nonpartisan survey. I had a lot of people from across the spectrum. And so that demonstrates to you that A, everybody thinks it's a problem and B, perhaps surprisingly to me, was that there were a lot of people that thought that the answer was not just to win over the other party, but to actually work with the other party, which is not how Washington looks from a distance. And so I try very, very hard in my own everyday work in Congress to find the opportunities where I can work across the aisle with somebody else, where I can try to find some consensus with somebody else, as opposed to just, no, just because you got an R after your name. After all, I don't want them to do that to me just because I have a D after my name. And it's not the right thing for the country. And so I talked a little bit, for example, about forming the Pacific Islands Caucus earlier. 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, we started talking and said, hey, this is a major issue for our country. Let's get together and do this. Our caucus is bipartisan. That's an opportunity. The CARES Act, which we passed for COVID-19, passed the House on a voice vote, meaning it was 100% supported. Passed the Senate similarly, signed by the president inside of 2 or 3 days. So it's not impossible, but we've fallen out of that habit of trying to listen to the other side. I have a real question in my own mind, which I'm going to try to figure out how to answer a little bit more systematically. I represent 750,000 people, and I just went through an election, and I had a very good result in that election. It was about 72-28%. Now, I'm not asking why 28% didn't vote for me, although it has occurred to me. But in the presidential election, we now saw in Hawaii voting for President Trump go from 29% last time around to about 35%. So that means that 1/3 of the people I represent, I'm their only representative in Congress. They voted for Trump, and I did not vote for Trump. And I don't know why they voted for Trump, in all honesty. And I want to find out, because I have to be able to represent them in Congress where I can, and to incorporate where I can their fears, their concerns, their perspectives, and try to balance that against the clear majority that voted for me and for President Biden. So it's a long effort. It's not something that you snap your fingers at. We've fallen out of practice in doing this. It's a little bit like perhaps a marriage. You stop communicating and start siloing yourselves, and pretty soon you don't know how to do it, and you don't know how to have a relationship anymore, and you got to relearn it. And so I think that's a lot of our challenge, but it has to happen. And so I'm committed to it.
All right, thank you for that color. There's a famous economist, and I forget his name. There's correlation with inequality in our country, on the wealth side, with also the entrenchment and polarization on the political side. So anyway, just make a comment there. Let's move on to a live question, assuming Kim gives me the thumbs up. Do we have one?
We do. We actually have a couple, but I'm going to read from one of them. This is from one of our attendees that says, Hawaii universities don't have the clout of, say, Stanford or MIT. If we can develop an R&D center, how do you as congressman promote Hawaii as a location for federally funded research? So if we are able to develop the R&D center, how would you support that?
Well, first of all, I disagree with the assumption in the question. We do world-class education and research and development right out of our educational systems in several fields, some of which would be pretty obvious to anybody, but several of which you wouldn't really think about. And frankly, the University of Hawaii and some of our private universities are doing this research really without people knowing what they're doing. And by the way, being world-class in these areas involves not just being world-class and attracting educational talent, but also money. So federal research dollars. So the obvious ones would be things like astronomy, ocean sciences, but there's other areas. Many of them relate to our presence in the Asia Pacific. For example, history. We also have many institutions, or not many. That's perhaps an exaggeration, but several institutions that are world-class, that have relationships to our educational system, but also have the same expertise and attract dollars. The East-West Center would be one. the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies down in Waikiki that nobody knows about. It's world class. And so we can build on these areas to get the federal dollars in, and that's exactly what we have to do. We have to build on our strengths. So, you know, if you go out there and you ask somebody in the world about, you know, astronomy, for example, UH is going to come to the top of the list. One of the best astronomy programs in the entire world. My daughter is a PhD graduate from the University of Hawaii, works for NASA now. So that was opportunity. And so you can see that now what we have to do is to not only maintain those core areas of expertise, but develop others based on our relative strengths. Sometimes I watch us compete for areas in the world where we have really no particular advantage, and I think, well, that's kind of a waste for us to go put our bucks into, figuratively and literally, into developing an area where how can we really compete with the world? But there's several areas where we can compete with the world just fine, and be the Stanford or, you know, Harvard, to use your question, in those areas. That's not an impossibility at all, and it is. The University of Hawaii actually brings a tremendous amount of money into our state's economy. I think at last count it was somewhere in the range of 200 million R&D kind of money, federal. So that's a productive, and those have spin-offs too. So the two companies I talked about, Oceanet and Nalo Scientific, they interact with that community to develop a bigger critical mass that starts to develop not just a couple of very, very good paying solid jobs, but a lot of very, very good paying solid jobs. We know from the centralization of tech in places like, you know, Silicon Valley and Route 28 and, you know, Austin, that it feeds on itself, and that can happen here too.
All right. Thank you. And thanks for that live question from the audience. Let's launch poll number 4. This is on Social Security. Couldn't help but, in the very beginning, Congressman, you're on the appropriations, and one of them does touch on Social Security. So for the audience, here's the question. How concerned are you about the future of Social Security benefits? Very concerned, mostly concerned, somewhat concerned, or not concerned? And, you know, while the audience is answering that poll, you know, in 2019, the trustees for the Social Security trust funds reported that, you know, program funds could be depleted by 2034. There's been other proposals, increasing the minimum age, flattening the benefit no matter what you've paid in, you know, restructuring it or privatizing it. There's a number of things there. So the question, while the audience is completing the survey, is, you know, what is your view about the future of Social Security in the next 30 years? You know, will we see the same benefits comparable to what our parents or grandparents had received? And I'll hand it off to Kim to see if we can close this poll.
Okay, let's close the poll. Okay, we have the results. Okay, so 55% of our attendees are somewhat concerned, 36% are mostly concerned, 9% very concerned, and 0% are not concerned. So those are our numbers, so take it away.
Well, again, going back to my own family, five children and two daughters-in-law, one formal, one informal, are all young professionals in one way, shape, or form. They're all in your demographic, and they kid me. They say to me, "Hey, what did you do today to spend my Social Security benefits?" So the answer to you is that I'm very concerned about our ability to maintain Social Security over time. Social Security has been one of the best programs our country has ever produced, literally lifted tens of millions of people out of abject poverty. By the way, particularly women, particularly single women in their elder years. And so there's been so much about Social Security that's been great. But as you pointed out, from a pure actuarial basis, we have been aiming Social Security towards a washout in a very short period of time. And fundamentally, the reason is because we've been spending more out of Social Security than we've been bringing in, and we've compounded the problem by borrowing, translate stealing, Social Security trust benefits, which should have been lockboxed over in Social Security, to pay for other needs in our government. So we owe a huge debt into Social Security just to pay Social Security benefits, and that's before we run the actuarial analysis that I talked about. And so if we don't change our current course, we're gonna see a substantial reduction in Social Security benefits. The program itself is not going to disappear. It's just how much at the end of the day, is going to be available to you 25 years before you're even eligible. And so we're on a very dangerous trajectory for Social Security. Now, that all sounds very scary, and it is, but you can, in fact, save Social Security. I'm on several bills in Congress to do just that, but it's tough decisions. For example, if you take a look at the decisions that are to be made, would you all, at your ages, agree to extend your current retirement date, which, if I'm not mistaken, is what, 68? It's a little bit after mine. Would you put it out to 69 in order to know that that money was going to be there then? Most people actually answer yes if it's a long way away. If you're close in on it, then NFW. So that's one answer. Another answer is to actually reduce the benefits. I don't think we have to do that. And another answer, which is a little controversial as well, is that right now we cap the salary on which you pay benefits. So there's really no difference in terms of how much you put in between somebody that makes $125,000 a year and somebody that makes $10 million a year. And so should we get more progressive if we did that? If we did a couple of key fixes, we actually could guarantee Social Security for you at roughly the same levels. But those decisions are tough decisions. And frankly, politicians have been scared to make those decisions. And I'm not the kind of person that likes to walk away from obvious problems, even if I take a little heat for it.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for spending the time with us. We only have literally a couple of minutes. And so I'm going to use this time to wrap it up. There's a YP trivia night on January 19th. And then tonight we have our end of the year kind of drive-in movie theater party. So for those on attendance, we'll see you there if you're joining us. And, a last question for you, Ed Case, is a fun fact, maybe something interesting about yourself that you didn't already tell us. Kind of leave that as the last word for you, if you have anything top of mind.
Well, let me say something before I get there. So many of the questions that you have asked me have their solutions in government. And so many times people say, well, why isn't my government doing that? Well, you know what? Go be your government. And to many people, that's like, oh, why would I want to go into government? And perhaps I was the same way. I mean, other than for my experience on Capitol Hill, I had a great career going before I went into government. Do I regret it? Not at all. I was able to contribute positively. And I hope that each and all of you that are on this call do one of two things. Number one, become a candidate yourself at some point, which is tough in Hawaii, but you can do it. And you should do it because you bring a perspective to our state and county government that frankly is lacking. You, in all honesty, don't get a lot of young professionals going into government. They're too busy trying to make a living and develop a career and support families. But we need you in your government. And so I hope a couple of you at least think about doing what I did. And then the second thing I would say to you is, if you're not going to do that, at least get involved in government. Go out and find a candidate that resonates with you, and you'd be surprised how much difference you can actually make for folks that are running for office. Go lead that next generation, the generations of leadership for Hawaii, like in 1954 and to some extent the 70s, and then again maybe in the late 90s. These generational changes in Hawaii, they were led by people like you, who saw the need for change and understood that the avenue to that change was government, and went in to change government. And so that's my pitch to you. And now that I've made my pitch, I forget what my fun fact was. I guess it is that the first time I ever met my wife was on the first day of 7th grade, in high school, and I smiled at her and she didn't smile back at me, and so it took us a while to get married. So there you go.
That's great.
All right, thank you.
That's great.
All
Thank you
right,
so much.
All right, thank you.
east.house.gov.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
Thank you, Congressman.
All right,
We
thank you so
appreciate
much.
your time.
Thank you,
Enjoyed it.
everybody on the call. Happy holidays.
Aloha.
Aloha. All right, Tricia, you can close us down. And mahalo to everybody, the participants, for putting in questions and going through that event.